My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. Note the title. I earned it, defended it, and despite my current circumstances, I still cling to it. It is the last vestige of a man I used to be, a man who once stood at the podium of international symposiums, not at the edge of the world, talking to a recorder. Science is a brutal religion. It rewards ambition and punishes heresy with equal fervor. My heresy? I was too ambitious. I published a paper on cellular regeneration in extremophile flora, hinting at a breakthrough that was more theoretical than proven. I saw a pattern the data didn't quite support yet, and I pushed. A rival colleague, a man with less vision and more patience, proved my data was premature. I wasn't fired. That would have been a scandal. Instead, I was offered a prestigious, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a golden exile. I was assigned to be the lead botanist and cryotechnician at the Aegis Global Seed Vault. It sounds impressive. It's meant to. The Aegis is one of humanity's greatest achievements, a subterranean library of life buried deep within the Arctic permafrost on a remote Norwegian island, a Noah's Ark for plants designed to withstand apocalypse. In reality, it is the most sophisticated, most expensive, and most isolated tomb on the planet. My new home was a sterile white module connected by heated tunnels to the main vault entrance. Outside, there was nothing but an endless expanse of ice, snow, and a sky that was either perpetually dark or painfully bright. The silence was absolute, a physical weight that pressed in on you. There were only 4 of us. Lena Petrova, the station commander and geologist, a stern Russian woman who seemed to view human interaction as an unnecessary expenditure of energy. Kenji Tanaka, a junior technician and robotics engineer, young, brilliant, and hopelessly optimistic. And me, the disgraced botanist. My work was simple. I was to oversee the automated systems that maintained the vault's temperature at a steady -18°C and to catalog new seed deposits that arrived twice a year. It was a janitor's job with a PhD. For 6 months, my life was a quiet routine of diagnostics, data entry, and staring down the vast frozen corridors of the vault. Corridors lined with shells holding millions of silver packets, each one a promise for a future I no longer felt a part of. I was a librarian for a world that might never come, preserving stories I would never see bloom. It was a fitting punishment, a cold, quiet purgatory, and I was content with it, until the ice core arrived.
It was Lena's project. Her team was drilling a new geological shaft 2 kilometers from the vault, deeper into the permafrost than anyone had gone before. They were looking for ancient climate data. They found something else. She brought the sample to my lab herself. It was a meter-long cylinder of ice, extracted from a depth of over a mile. The ice at that level was ancient, a frozen record of a time before humanity. "Look at this," she said, her voice for the first time holding a spark of excitement. She pointed to a dark inclusion trapped in the center of the core. It wasn't a pocket of gas or a mineral deposit. It looked organic. A black, seed-like object surrounded by a delicate, web-like structure of frozen filaments. My professional curiosity, long dormant, awoke with a jolt. This was my world, ancient, unknown flora, life that had been sleeping since the Pleistocene. "The protocols are absolute," Lena warned, her usual sternness returning. Maintain containment at all times. Temperature must remain below -40 Celsius. No direct exposure. "I know the protocols, Commander," I replied, perhaps a bit too sharply. My lab was a state-of-the-art cryo-containment unit. I could manipulate the sample with robotic arms in a sealed, nitrogen-cooled environment. I began the analysis. The object was not a seed. My initial scans were inconclusive. Its cellular structure was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was crystalline, yet it showed signs of complex organic molecules. It was a spore, but not a fungal or bacterial one. It was something else entirely, something ancient and alien. The filaments surrounding it were even more bizarre. They formed a perfect, intricate network, like the neural pathways of a brain frozen in mid-thought. It was beautiful, frighteningly so. For a week I was lost in my work. I slept in 4-hour shifts, spending every waking moment running tests, mapping the spore's structure, and marveling at its impossible biology. Kenji would often join me, his face pressed against the observation window, chattering excitedly about the possibilities. "Imagine if it's viable, Aris, a life form from before the Ice Age." His optimism was infectious, but I remained cautious. Science is not about imagination. It's about observation, and what I was observing was starting to make me deeply uneasy. The spore seemed to react to our observation. The patterns of the filaments would shift subtly when we ran different sensor sweeps. It was almost as if it knew we were watching.
The first incident was minor. A power fluctuation. A backup generator kicked in a microsecond too late, and for exactly 90 seconds, the temperature in the cryo-containment unit rose. Not by much, from -40 to -35, an insignificant deviation. Then it stabilized. But in those 90 seconds, something changed. When I checked the high-resolution microscope camera later, I saw it. The spore was unchanged, but on the inside of the glass containment chamber, a thin layer of frost had formed. This was normal. What was not normal was the pattern. The frost wasn't random. It had formed delicate, branching patterns, like ice crystals on a window pane. But these patterns were too perfect. They mirrored the filament network around the spore. It was an exact macroscopic replica of the neural-like web I had been studying. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Frost does not form in such complex, ordered patterns. It's a matter of physics, of chaos theory. This was not chaos. This was order. This was information. I tried to rationalize it. A unique combination of atmospheric pressure and static electricity, a trick of the light. I wrote it down in my log as an anomalous crystalline formation and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. I had the distinct, chilling feeling that the specimen was no longer just a specimen. It was an architect, and it was starting to decorate its new home.
I started observing him. I kept a private log, separate from the official station records. Day 1 post-incident. Subject KT reports persistent cold. Skin temperature is 2 degrees below his baseline. He wears extra layers, but still shivers. Day 2. Subject has become mostly nonverbal. Responds to direct questions with one-word answers.
spends his off hours staring at the schematics for the main vault's climate control systems. His movements are efficient, economical, no wasted gestures. Day 3. This was the turning point. I saw him humming. He was in the robotics lab repairing a small drone, and he was humming. It was a strange, discordant tune, a series of notes that didn't resolve, just endlessly cycled. It was the same rhythmic pattern I had isolated from the static of the spore. I confronted him. "Kenji, where did you hear that tune?" He stopped humming. He turned his head slowly to look at me, but his eyes didn't focus. They looked through me. "It's just a song," he said, his voice a monotone whisper. "To help the seeds grow." Then I saw it. On the back of his neck, just below his hairline, was a delicate, branching pattern of white. It wasn't a rash, it was frost. Perfect, crystalline frost growing on his skin in the warm, dry air of the station. The fungus was inside him. It wasn't a pathogen that killed its host. It was a symbiote, a parasite that rewrote its host from the inside out. It was using Kenji's knowledge, his access, his hands. Kenji, the brilliant young engineer, was now just a biological tool for an intelligence that had been dreaming under a mile of ice. I went to Lena. I showed her my private log, the thermal scans showing Kenji's dropping body temperature, the audio recording of his humming. She listened, her face a mask of stone. She didn't call me a madman. A geologist who deals with the ancient history of the earth knows that some things buried should stay buried. She asked, "What does it want?" I looked towards the reinforced tunnel that led to the heart of our facility. "It wants the Ark, Lena. It wants your seeds."
The main vault was the ultimate prize. Billions of seeds, the genetic library of an entire planet. If the fungus could get inside, it wouldn't just survive. It would have the genetic toolkit to reshape life on Earth into its own image. A new, frozen garden. We had to act. We couldn't risk an open confrontation. Kenji was still Kenji on the outside. He could still talk, still reason, still pretend. But inside, he was a passenger in his own body. And he was smart. He knew every system, every override code in this facility. Lena and I devised a plan. It was desperate. We would initiate a level 5 containment protocol. It was a protocol that wasn't even supposed to be used, a last resort designed for a biological or nuclear attack from the outside world. It would seal the entire station, separating the living quarters and central command from the labs in the main vault. Heavy blast doors would descend. Communications with the outside world would be severed. Power would be rerouted to only essential systems. The protocol had a manual override, a single terminal in the central command room. Lena would handle that. My job was to get to the vault's primary control room on the other side of the station and initiate a deep freeze of the access corridor, creating a wall of solid ice. But we had to lure Kenji away from the vault controls first. Lena came up with the ruse. She sent him a Priority 1 maintenance request. Critical failure in the geothermal power converter 2 levels down. It was a complex, dangerous job, the only one that would require his specific expertise and keep him occupied for at least an hour. He took the bait. I watched him on the security cameras, moving with that same eerie, efficient gait, his toolkit in hand, descending into the lower levels. "Now, Aris," Lena's voice crackled over my personal comms. I ran. I ran through the sterile white corridors, my boots echoing in the silence. The station felt like a ticking bomb. Every shadow looked like him. Every hum of a machine sounded like his discordant tune. I reached the vault control room, my lungs burning. I slammed my hand on the console, initiating the deep freeze. A heavy thud echoed through the station as the blast doors began to descend. I was sealed in, trapped in the most secure part of the station, the part the creature wanted most. It was me, the seeds, and a ticking clock. On the security monitor, I saw Kenji. He had stopped his work. He was looking up, directly at the camera in the geothermal plant. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. His face was a perfect, calm blank. And then he began to walk back up. He knew.
The next hours were the longest of my life. The station was plunged into a dim emergency lighting. The silence was absolute. I was in the vault's outer control room, a small glass and steel box that overlooked the massive reinforced main door. That door was my only shield. I watched the monitors, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw him on the cameras, moving through the sealed-off corridors. He wasn't running. He was walking, slowly, deliberately. He was testing the doors one by one. He didn't use force. He just stood there, his hand on the control panel, and I would see the lights on the panel flicker and die. He was communicating with the station's systems, persuading them, corrupting them. He was a ghost in the machine, and the machine was his body. I watched as he bypassed the lock on the main laboratory section. The door hissed open. He walked inside, straight to the cryo-containment unit, holding the original spore. He didn't break the glass. He just placed his hand on it. The frost on the inside of the chamber, the frost that had formed a perfect replica of the neural network, began to glow with a soft blue light. The frost on his own skin pulsed in response. They were synchronizing. The main sample was waking up. Then he turned and walked out of the lab, heading directly from my location. He was coming for the vault. I cut the power to the cameras in my corridor. I didn't want him to see me. I crouched behind the main console, armed with the only weapon I had, a fire extinguisher. The corridor outside was dark, silent. Then I heard it, a soft scraping sound, and the humming. It was right outside my door. He wasn't trying to hack the lock. He was trying to freeze it. I watched in horror as a delicate, beautiful lacework of frost spread from the edges of the door, crawling across the steel. The temperature in my small room began to plummet. The metal of the console was painfully cold to the touch. The door's locking mechanism groaned, the metal contracting in the extreme cold. It was going to shatter.
I was going to die. The cold would take me, or he would. But he wouldn't get the seeds. That was my last defiant thought. And in that moment of despair, I remembered my training, my real training, not just as a botanist, but as a cryo-technician. What is the enemy of extreme cold? Extreme, rapid thermal change. The fire suppression system. Every section of the station was equipped with a halon-gassed fire suppression system. But the main vault corridor, because of the sensitive nature of the seeds, had something else. A dual system. Halon and a liquid nitrogen failsafe, designed to instantly freeze any fire and suck all the oxygen out of the air. It was a weapon of last resort. Using it would destroy every electronic system in this section and render it uninhabitable. It would be my tomb, but it would be his too. The door groaned.
A final tortured sound, and the lock shattered into 1,000 pieces. The door slid open. Kenji stood there. But it wasn't Kenji. His skin was pale blue, covered with a shimmering layer of frost. His eyes were completely white, like frozen orbs. The discordant humming came from his throat, a sound that made the air vibrate. He was no longer a host. He was the organism itself. He took a step inside. He didn't look at me. He looked at the main vault door behind me. I didn't hesitate. I lunged for the wall panel, smashed the glass with the fire extinguisher, and pulled the emergency lever for the nitrogen failsafe. A deafening hiss erupted from the ceiling vents. Not gas, a thick, white cloud of liquid nitrogen vapor, colder than anything on the surface of the earth, poured into the corridor. The temperature dropped from freezing to absolute zero in seconds. The creature that was Kenji stopped. It looked up at the vents, a look of what I can only describe as confusion on its frozen face. It opened its mouth to hum, but the sound froze in its throat. It raised a hand, and I watched as the frost on its skin grew thick, encasing it in a shell of pure ice. The blue light in its skin flickered, dimmed, and then went out. It stood there for a long second, a perfect, beautiful, terrifying ice sculpture. Then, with the sound like 1,000 tiny bells shattering, it collapsed into a pile of frozen dust on the floor. The white cold filled my control room. I felt my own lungs begin to freeze. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the frost spreading across my monitor, forming a final, triumphant, beautiful pattern.
Final log entry. Dr. Aris Thorne. Date unknown. The emergency power in the control room is failing. The air is thin, cold. I don't have much time. The failsafe worked. The entity that was Kenji is neutralized. The corridor is a tomb of ice. The main spore sample in the lab, I have to assume it's inert, frozen solid. But I don't think it's dead. Life finds a way, especially life that has slept for 1,000,000 years. I am sealed in this section of the vault. The lockdown is permanent. There is no way out. This is my final act of quarantine, my final contribution to the science I once disgraced. In my ambition, I sought to create life. In the end, I found redemption only in destroying it, a perfect, terrible symmetry. If you are hearing this, if this log ever reaches the outside world, then send this warning. Do not drill deeper. Do not thaw what has been frozen. The permafrost is not a record of the past. It is a prison, and the inmates are patient. Lena, I hope you made it out. I hope you tell them. The power is fading. It's so cold.
But the strange thing is, for the first time in a long time, I feel at peace. The humming in my head is finally quiet. Wait. There is a pattern forming on the outside of the observation window. A beautiful lacework of frost.